I've got a lot to unload here on today's podcast. This podcast that you're watching right now on YouTube is powered by Score North. A couple of tidbits to get into, mostly revolved around players that the Vikings have signed in recent days. And then also at the end of this podcast, I owe an apology to all of Vikings Nation and to all of those that support the Minnesota Vikings. I need to hold myself accountable, damn it, for something that I brought up, or at least projected of something that the Vikings should do. I think this was like a month ago or month or so ago. I'll be sure to talk about that. I owe an apology, and I'm not above it. This is Realistic Randy, Mediokr, Best Sports Podcast. Thank you for tuning in. First, as of yesterday, on Monday, the Vikings signed Carter Schultz, defensive lineman from the Alliance of American Football League. That lasted for about a half hour. Played for the Salt Lake City Stallions, in which he had 7 sacks this past season before they closed shop. And then also a couple of days before that, the Vikings also signed 2 other players from the AAF, Darren Smith and Duke Thomas. Darren Smith is a safety. Duke Thomas is a cornerback. Both played for the San Antonio Commanders. And in the case of Darren Smith, he was named as Pro Football Focus's Player of the Year for the AAF. Now, what does this mean in the grand scheme of things? What impact does this have for your Vikings going into 2019, at least for right now? Nothing, man. Nothing. This ain't nothing to raise hell about. Come on, man. I know it's the off season. It's something to talk about. Who they might not even, for all we know, they may not even make the roster. And I'm not trying to trash these players or anything like that. If they make the roster, okay, fine. That's great. But for right now, it's just hype. We'll see how they do. As far as the bigger picture, I think it's really cool what the AAF did while they lasted, as far as serving as a post-college football funnel system for the NFL, because now you're seeing a number of former AAF players get signed to NFL teams. But as far as what does this mean for the Vikings right now, nothing, man. This kind of reminds me of a couple of years ago when the Vikings, they signed from Germany, Moritz Boehringer, wide receiver, and he came all the hype, and he was selling jerseys, and that's all well and good, and he didn't make the team. So if these 3 guys, if any of them make the team, okay, we'll talk about it. Or if we get a chance, if they get a chance to play it all in the preseason, we'll talk about that. But I don't think this really means anything. But who knows? The AAF, they're done. Their league is finished. But maybe the XFL, they're kicking off in 2020. Maybe they will serve as the next funnel system for the NFL. But it's good to see that these guys get an opportunity, especially where you're talking about former NFL players that go to these outside organizations to get snaps that they wouldn't have gotten in the NFL to showcase their stuff. So good stuff for that. As far as for the Vikings, what it means right now, absolutely nothing. Another move that the Vikings have made, they have signed for, at least for right now, for the backup quarterback spot, the QB2 spot, Sean Mannion. My reaction to that is it's amazing the amount of garbage that the Vikings have came up with excuses for to trot out on that field, whether it's Laquan Treadwell or Matt Khalil, and it's just like all the excuses they come up with. But a guy like Kyle Sloter that shows you some promise and shows you some flash to where it's like, I want to see more of this. You owe it to yourself to see more, to make sure that, okay, if it doesn't work out, at least you tried your best, but you're not giving this dude an opportunity. The disrespect to Kyle Sloter is unreal. And who knows, maybe this is just a competition. Maybe this is going to be a competition between Sean Mannion and Kyle Sloter for the QB2 spot. But if I was the GM, if I were the GM, this wouldn't even be a question. I wouldn't be wasting my time and energy after going after a Sean Mannion or trying to bring back Trevor Siemian. I'd be like, oh, yeah, Kyle Sloter, it's your job. I would instead try to spend my time as far as trying to create cap space to be able to sign my players that I'm going to draft later this month. And that brings me to my next subject. According to Spotrac.com, the Minnesota Vikings have just under $2.5 million in cap space right now. So you need about just over $5 million in order to do that. So what are they going to do? I think the obvious move right now, you can't trade a cornerback unless you're going to take one in the first round because of Holton Hill getting suspended for the first 4 games of the season. I think the only other move that you can make right now is to either, I don't know if you can still restructure Kyle Rudolph because the league year has started now. I don't know if that's an option, or if you can just trade him. I don't know, because he's making about $7.5 million against the cap. If you had not let your pride, or as far as blind loyalty getting away in free agency with certain players, maybe you wouldn't be in this situation right now, but we'll have to see how it all plays out. I'm a little bit concerned. So before the Vikings are on the clock with the 18th pick in the draft later this month, the Vikings are officially on the clock to free up some damn cap space so you can sign your draft picks later this month. So anyway, moving forward from that, before I get into my apology, I think one player that hasn't really gotten enough love and support, or I guess attention, and he should, is Mackensie Alexander. And the reason why I bring him up, he had a hell of a year. He finally showed up. He went from a guy where it was just like, all right, dude, like, this dude can't get off the team soon enough. They can't cut this dude quick enough as far as I'm concerned, because he came in, I believe, 2016. So his first 2 years, it was pretty much a dud of a career. And then he had a resurgence where it's like, oh, man. And it wasn't even his coverage that popped out. His coverage was okay. It was more so his plays outside of coverage. We're talking about rushing a passer, making plays in the running game, tackles for losses. I'm looking at his stats right now. Mackensie Alexander, last year, he had a combined 43 tackles, 4 sacks, and 7 tackles for losses and 5 quarterback hits. So we're talking about a cornerback that's rushing the passer, making plays in the running game, making tackles, making key tackles out there. And it's to the point where, and I'm going to make a comparison, and you guys watch it because I can feel it right now where you're like, oh, how dare you bring up this name. But as far as for last year, 2018, I think Mackensie Alexander's year, and you know, but before I get into that, something that really annoyed me, not only was Mackensie Alexander, was he on, I don't know if you can call him a bust because he's not going to make it on the team much longer after his rookie deal is up. But after that NFC Championship game in 2018 against the Philadelphia Eagles, almost what seemed like immediately after that game, 38-7, after watching that blowout and no effort from either side of the ball outside of Jerick McKinnon and the wide receivers, Mackensie Alexander almost immediately after that game got on Twitter and said, the best is yet to come, #Skull. And I was like, man, if you don't shut up, just shut up. I don't want to hear you talk about motivational, inspirational speeches after watching that piece of crap. But anyway, I was a little bit annoyed with him, but after 2 years of having a dud start to his career, 2018 was very comparable. His year, Mackensie Alexander's 2018, was very comparable to Antoine Winfield as far as being an additional outside linebacker, making tackles. It was just crazy to watch where his value is really high. My curiosity with Mackensie Alexander, he should get the love that he deserves, at least for this offseason. Can it continue? Will it continue? I don't know. I'm very interested. He deserves a shout out. He had a hell of a season. The last thing that I'm going to talk about, what I actually owe an apology for, is about a month ago, about 3 weeks, month and a half ago, can't remember the timeline, Antonio Brown, he made it clear he wanted to get off the Steelers, he wanted to get traded, and blah, blah, blah. And I posted a podcast, and I was like, hey, here are the moves that the Minnesota Vikings can do. And I know a couple of other folks on Score North, I think Matthew Collar talked about it as well, where it's like, here are the moves that the Vikings can make to free up cap space, let alone to go after whatever other players you want. But if you want to go after Antonio Brown, here's what you can do. And I spelled it out, and it was very, very possible for the Vikings to do it. And I remember when I posted that, people were like, oh, he's a head case, you don't want him. And I remember someone asked me, like, would you do it? And I say, if it were up to me, I personally would do it. I think with Diggs, Thielen, and Antonio Brown, this offense would have been dynamic. It would have been explosive, provided that you had given Kirk Cousins an offensive line in this offseason. We'll have to see how that plays out. But I was like, yeah, I'd go after Antonio Brown. And you know what? I owe an apology. It's almost comparable to last offseason when I was like, oh, the Vikings, they should go after Richie Incognito. Despite all the BS that he did early on, I was like, you know what? He's a changed man. You never know. A change of scenery. Mike Zimmer, he can get to him. Discipline, all that stuff. And he turned out to be, you know, he had a bunch of issues later on at a hotel gym, throwing a dumbbell at a dude, whatever. I was like, oh, you know, I owe an apology for ever suggesting that Antonio Brown has gone off the rails this offseason. You were already traded, dude. You're gone. You're on the Raiders. There's no reason to even talk about the Steelers anymore. And you're sitting here taking shots at Juju Smith-Schuster, talking about on Twitter, emotion. Boy fumbled the whole postseason in the biggest game of the year. Everyone went blind to busy making guys famous. Not enough reality these days. So we're talking about, or he's talking about Juju Smith-Schuster. I think this was either week 16 or week 17. Pittsburgh Steelers, they had a chance to still make the playoffs, and Smith-Schuster fumbled the ball away, turned the ball over, and that pretty much sealed the fate of the Pittsburgh Steelers. But, you know, it's like, why are you going after this dude? This dude respected the hell out of you, and you know what? He made a mistake. Outside of that one, people make mistakes. You know, it happens. You're not going to be perfect all the time, but outside of that one mistake, he's a hell of a player. He's a heck of a football player. I'd love to have Juju Smith-Schuster on my Vikings team, okay? Now, it's different from when I went off on like Blair Walsh or Laquan Treadwell in week 2, where he let the pass just go off of his fingertips and get an interception, nearly lost that game in Green Bay on week 2, or Blair Walsh, where I went off on him because I'm like, these dudes are terrible players from start to finish. They've been showing that they've been shaky players. But in the case of Juju, he's been a heck of a player, and he just had an unfortunate mistake, and that's fine. But outside of that, you're on the Raiders. You shouldn't even be talking about him anymore. Forget it. Move on, right? And then what happened? Smith-Schuster is just like, yo, I showed you nothing but respect. What's the problem? What are you doing? Like, come on, man. What's the problem? And then Antonio Brown thinks that he's trying to get back at Smith-Schuster by posting a screenshot of when Juju was at USC. And I don't know what AB thought he was trying to prove with this or whatsoever, but Smith-Schuster said in this screenshot, a DM to AB, Antonio Brown, back when he was at USC. Sent him a DM. It looks like this was on Instagram, I think. What's up, AB? I'm a receiver at the University of Southern California. I appreciate all your work. You're a great man on and off the field. Do you have any tips that can help take my game to the next level? Thanks, man. That's all he said. Like, that's literally all he said. And AB's like, yeah, look at this. Look at this screenshot of this dude asking me for help. The nerve of this dude. This dude's a clown. What was the point of that? Antonio Brown is making himself look more and more like a jackass by the day. At first, I was supporting Antonio Brown, where it's like, yo, Ben Roethlisberger, he's had some issues. And he's shown a little bit where he's like, oh, I'm going to retire, and then you come back and play. And you can tell he's kind of a diva quarterback, but now he's looking like a jackass. So I apologize for ever suggesting that the Vikings should bring on Antonio Brown. Glad he's not our problem. As much as I critique players and I get on players, I need to hold myself accountable too. I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I never said it. So this was a lot of fun, guys. We do this podcast twice a week, Tuesdays on Score North, and then on Saturdays, my personal YouTube channel. Just search Realistic Randy. On Twitter, you can follow me at realistic_Randy, Facebook at Realistic Randy. We will see you on Saturday.